Hi there! Welcome back to another video on my channel. This week I thought I would do something a little bit more educational for you guys. This video is going to be based off of a class I took with Story Studio Chicago. If you guys remember, I vlogged my experience back in November of attending a weekend seminar sponsored by Story Studio of Chicago, which is like a nonprofit here to help writers in the city of Chicago. They had a seminar in November and they had all these like guest speakers and you could take different classes with different guest speakers. So I thought today I would just kind of like present to you some of the information I learned in one of those classes just so that we can all try to improve our craft. I am just going to talk about this class that was called Writing Little Monsters. If you're interested in learning about writing monsters and you love reading and writing horror, just stay tuned and keep watching this video. Okay, I'm gonna be like every now and then grabbing this mug because it is very cold here in this room and the tea is hot. So I'm gonna be trying to balance out my body temperatures every now and then by drinking tea. Okay, so I have my notebook in front of me. I'm basically going off of these notes that I took during that time, but I will also be presenting written information right here as we're going along. If you guys are also curious, I know I've covered this topic before, like a long time ago, long time ago. I have a video about like I think I called it How to Write a Monster, and I do not remember what's in that video at all, truthfully. But I think I talked about like using RPG mechanics to help create monsters. This is going to be slightly different. This is more from a literary perspective. And again, I was kind of using stuff that I tend to do at that time when writing monsters because a lot of my work involves some sort of monstrosity or monster at play. So yeah, that's what I did. If you're interested in the video, I'll be putting it up here somewhere, or I have already done that. I don't know. Editing me will figure it out. But this is like part two of that video, I guess, how many years later. So I'm going to be borrowing from the class that was taught by Puloma Ghosh. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I'll have it written on screen here. And I want to give her full credit because these are all her ideas, essentially. And she has also debuted a short story collection, a very popular short story collection. I'll put the picture here as well. It is called Mouth, and she likes to play with desire as a monstrosity. So there's a lot of eroticism in her work as well, not just horror, and like writing from this place of carnal, bestial desire. So if you're into that, please check out her work as well. She was a great teacher and she seems like a really cool person. So, but yeah, this is what I learned from her class. Okay, so in the beginning, obviously you want to define like what a monster is, and we define monster as anything that's outside of normalcy in a way that is threatening to us or the current systems at play or whatever. It is the manifestation of otherness. Okay, so the job of the monster, right, from this lens is to antagonize, to tempt, and to subvert. So I'm going to have those words out here and I'm going to put like sub things under each word. Okay. So for the job of antagonizing, what they do is they challenge the characters. Some examples of an antagonistic monster that she wrote down is Pennywise the clown from It and Grendel from Beowulf. Two, a monster could tempt a character, right? To entice a character. Example of this that she put is Lestat from Interview with an Vampire. I have not read the book Interview with a Vampire, but I love everything. I love the movie and I love the show that came out recently. So that's been on my list to read for a very long time. But like Lestat, right? I think vampires in general tend to have this role of enticing their victims or to tempt their victims into sin, whatever. And Lestat is a wonderful example of that. She also listened Dorian from Dorian Gray, which is a book I literally finished like yesterday. Yeah, Dorian's whole vibe is descending into sin and bringing down everybody else around him through his own sinful actions. Spoiler alert, some of the other characters in the book, like when they have a relationship with him or whatever, they end up killing themselves or they are ostracized from society some way. They develop really bad habits, or people just kind of die around him through his own actions. So yes, so we also have Dorian from Dorian Gray. Okay, so under subvert, they break normal conventions, right? So what I just said previously, example she gave is Frankenstein's monster. He breaks social conventions just by existing. And another one, I'm not familiar with this, but she wrote Behemoth from Master and Margarita. I think that's what I wrote. If I will Google it. I'll put a picture of this person on here, and I will teach myself as well as you guys who that is. So editing me will put this information in there. But yeah, so those are like the three functions of a monster. When creating a monster, it's important to keep these things in mind, of course. But also, when you're in the process of creating, you can either try to create something brand new or something referential. What do I mean by that? Well, new obviously is new. We know what that means. You can create a new monster by creating something that behaves like a blend of animal and human. You can also write it in a way where other characters find them particularly disturbing, or you can write the monster in a way that holds a symbolic significance. So it could be like a manifestation of grief, burden, or inheritance, something like that. The example she used for this is Moses and Gaspar from Aparlo de Vida. And then when we're talking referential, that's a little bit different. So it's just taking something that previously exists and like putting a spin on it. The example she uses is like vampires, because vampires are pretty popular. And how many different vampire novels do we have now, right? So you take character notes from existing vampire canon, right? So you write, like, for example, Carmilla, right? Carmilla is one of the oldest vampire stories we have, and that is literally about homophobia and man's fear of a woman seducing another woman, right? So for Carmilla, she is beautiful and seductive, and women find her irresistible. With Dracula, like the prime example of what a vampire is, he is pale and aristocratic, right? He is a wealthy man from a far off place, a little bit mysterious. And then we have like the film Dark Shadows, right? In Dark Shadows, they're a vampire family, but they embody that aspect of Dracula where they're like super well dressed and also pretty pale and alluring in some strange way. But we also have, like, for example, Interview with a Vampire embodies all those tropes, like especially with like Lestat. So that he is this beautiful, alluring man from some far off place, sort of dangerous, sort of pale, and can easily entice those around him. So there you go. Another thing to think about when you're creating a monster, are you going to be literal or are you going to write something a little bit more abstract, right? If you're writing a monster to be literal, it needs to be grounded in a specific sensory experience. Also, the characters can interact with this monster physically, and it exists on the same plane as your characters, right? So in this case, it's not something like a ghost, it's something that's living in real time with your characters, and they can physically feel it. And like with a sensory experience, maybe it's something that you can smell before you see, right? So I mean, seeing it is also a sensory experience, but if it has a particular odor, if it has a particular cry, like a certain sound. So the example given for this one is Monstrilio by Gerardo Samano Cordova. For an abstract monster, you're going to use highly figurative descriptions. It takes on an amorphous quality that isn't quite anthropomorphic, right? So this is going to be a little bit more vague, a little bit more conceptual, a little less concrete than something that is quite literal. And the example she uses in this sense is within the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer. So yeah, just other things to consider when creating a monster. So again, we're going to go, I feel like we're starting out grand and making it smaller, right? So this is like a little formula you can use to create a monster. Next, we're going to focus on attributes. What are the attributes of the monster we're making? So for this one, we're going to focus on the physical, the behavioral, and the internal life of the monster. So what does that mean? Physical attributes are like the sensory experiences, like I talked about. Is this thing hairy? What is the texture of its fur? What does the fur smell like? What does it feel like when you touch it? What color is it when you see it? Things like that. Behavioral. So what are its habits, actions, and compulsions? If we have a hairy monster, then we assume it's a mammal. But what kind of mammal? Is it more bear-like? Is it ape-like? Because the behaviors of a bear and the behaviors of an ape are going to be vastly different, right? Like a bear is going to have periods where they hibernate. It's going to have claws, right? If you're taking attributes from a bear, whereas with an ape or something, it might have more of a social hierarchy. It might live in social groups. It might have this element of the need to dominate in it. If it's like a gorilla or something, it might have certain social cues with its teeth, its faces, the kind of expressions it uses to communicate with others. So yeah, this is something you can consider for sure. And then you also want to focus on the internal life of the creature, of the monster, whatever you're making, its level of intelligence, its emotions, its opinions, and its desires, right? So if we have a monster that has a low level of intelligence, then it's going to have more basic kind of emotions and less complex opinions and desires on things. It's going to be more of a survival based monster. But if you have a monster with more elevated intelligence, it might have internal realizations about the world it lives in. It might be able to reflect on how it's treated by the other characters in the book. It might be self-aware enough to know that it is currently being othered by society. So yeah, something to play around with for sure. So now we're going to move on to rules. So as wonderful as it would be if we had wrote something where our monster is completely OP and like indestructible, right? You could do that, but most of the time when we write monsters, we have to have certain rules in place. Some of the rules that she talks about depend for like human-like monsters versus non-human-like monsters, right? So for human-like monsters, they're probably going to have a human-shaped body, human emotions. They participate in society in some capacity. They can also be a consumer, so they have to buy things or consume things, or they have more rules in place that reflect the rules of like an everyday person. With Lestat, right? You see him, he's in a human shaped body, he has human emotions, he participates in society to an extent. And he also likes to gamble, buy things. Well, you know, in the show he was big into the gambling too, and he has to sustain himself by consuming food and yeah. But then you have other non-human like rules for the same monster, right? So this would be anything that makes it stand out as like not human. So it could be the color, it could be the type of skin they have, bright eyes, teeth, fangs, the fact that it's nocturnal. It has an appetite for killing, hence what I was talking about. It needs to consume food, and immortality. So if we look at Lestat, we see the rules that apply it to the human and the non-human alike. So now we're going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of your monster. Like I mentioned before, if your monster is OP, then that could be a written rule too. But sometimes to make it more well-rounded, you need strengths and weaknesses for your monster that you're creating. Again, within the realm of vampires and Lestat, we talk about the strength, right? He is physically powerful. He has enhanced physical capacities. He is a predator. He is beautiful and seductive, and they can read minds, right? In this universe, vampires can read minds. So those are all of his strengths. But going on the weakness to try to like nerf said monster, vampires or Lestat in general is weak to sunlight and stakes. They have to live discreetly. They can't be found out. They are always hungry, and they're unable to form lasting relationships with mortals. So that could be seen as perceived weaknesses for a vampire-like monster. Okay, so now we have our monster. We did the character creation part of said monster, and we got all the strengths and weaknesses and the physical attributes and all of that. Now we have to move on to the monster's role in the story, right? We kind of hinted on that in the beginning, that the monster is meant to challenge the characters, challenge, tempt, or subvert characters' expectations, right? So now we're talking about the character's relationship with the monster. How should the reader feel about the monster? Should they feel fear, attraction, pity, empathy, or should they identify with said monster, right? So when we think of Lestat from Interview with a Vampire, there is attraction and fear, which are opposing emotions. So this could be a complex character with those opposing emotions. It's also important to contextualize your monster within your world. That way they can have various angles on how they're perceived or how they're interacted with, right? So you're not just getting like one character's perspective on said monster, but you can get a multiple points of view. In Frankenstein, they kind of did this when Frankenstein visited that like family with the blind relative, and that way like there was a split moment of like empathy and understanding and togetherness for Frankenstein that caused this jarring disposition when the rest of the family rejected him besides the blind person, right? So that can be add layers to your story as well. Some stuff to consider as well: how well known are they? Are they sensed by anybody else in the story? Are they completely secret? How does society feel about the monster in general, if they're aware of them? Is the monster hunted? Are they hated, ignored, loved? Does the monster try to conform or subvert society? So all things to consider for that. And then when the last things to consider is how the monster fits in with the plot of the story, right? In this class, she talked about 5 separate plots that tend to pop up when writing a story that's based around a monster. So you either have the main character defeating a monster. You have the monster defeating the character as 2. You have the character becoming a monster. You have the monster becoming character. And then you have character and monster joining. With that, like joining doesn't necessarily have to mean like they're besties or they join forces. Sometimes they can also separate or just like have some sort of mutual understanding with one another, like agreeing to disagree, right? So it is some sort of like joining or resolution between the monster and the character themselves that's not necessarily antagonistic or one taking over the other, because like with the character defeating the monster or the character becoming the monster, it's almost like okay, fully encapsulating the other. Likewise, the monster defeating the character, a monster becomes character is like a similar concept, but the fifth one is important because then it's more of them standing like this, like side by side almost, as opposed to encapsulating the other. So yeah, those are 5 different plot points you might want to consider when writing a story surrounding your monster to see like what point do you want to get across. And those might change. Like character becoming monster might cause the reader to have more empathy and like with the monster itself and understanding their motivations and actions. Whereas if you want the character to like defeat the monster, then it could be a tale of tragedy surrounding the monster, or it can be the monster represents like some dark aspect of the main character, and by the character defeating said monster, it is them kind of reclaiming their narrative over grief, death, trauma, whatever. I've been reading a lot of horror stories that revolve around monsters being metaphors for trauma. Two come to mind right now where I'm thinking about Night Bitch, and I'm thinking about The Haunting of Alexandria. And I haven't read Alejandra, disculpa. I'm sorry. Oh my gosh. Anyway, yeah, The Haunting of Alejandra. If I'm remembering correctly, the character defeats monster, and the monster in that is based off of Mexican folklore, and that is talking about an identity that's part of herself that she wants to reconnect to because she is a Mexican woman that's adopted by a white family. She kind of defeats the monster to regain self-confidence in her marriage to this white man. Again, I read it a hot minute ago, so if I get something wrong, please correct me in the comments. No shame in correcting, like if we got something wrong, like I don't mind. But like that's what comes to mind. And then Night Bitch is going to be different if you watch the movie or the book. I read the book first, and the ending of the book is powerful and weird, and I love it. And it's almost like the character becomes monster and stays monster, and I love that. But in the movie, I do not know why. I do know why. But in the movie with Night Bitch, they completely changed the ending and they made it seem like she didn't need this monstrous part of herself anymore, because she's like, oh, in spite of all the bullshit that comes with motherhood, because spoiler alert, this woman turns into a dog to represent like a lost identity in a search for this reclamation of power post motherhood, because motherhood is a beast and it's really scary, and all this kind of stuff. So in the movie, she kind of stops doing the monstrous shit because she comes to terms with motherhood being a beautiful thing, which defeats the entire point of the book because in the book she doesn't do that. It is the acceptance of motherhood being this nasty, bestious, grotesque thing, in addition to something that could bring about power. So yes, the messaging is very different. And so for that one, I would say that like character in the movie, I would say it's like character defeats monster because she defeats this monstrous part of herself. Because in the book, she accepts it. In the movie, she ends up popping up out another baby for some fucking reason, which never happens in the book. Sorry, this is like my rant about Night Bitch. Anyway, sorry, that was a little bit of a sidetrack conversation. But yeah, so those are different ways you can examine these plot points. Such Sharp Teeth does a similar thing about a woman and her bodily trauma from an assault, and she turns into a werewolf as a result of that. But there's also allusions to other forms of bodily harm in her past, and so it's coming to like reconcile that, right? Where you have, I guess, character and monster join. I don't know. We'll see. Try doing this exercise yourself. Try sitting down and doing this exercise and taking some of the horror books or some of the monster books that you've read recently and try to see how they fit within the different plot points and plot modes. It might become more insightful when you try to do like the same sort of thing. Honestly, it's just good advice in general. Like if you are wanting to write something to read within the genre or the the themes that you want to write in, right? So become well versed in some of the stories you want to write in. That's why I read a ton of books about monsters, because I myself enjoy writing them and creating them. So it always helps to read books about monsters, whether that's a horror, whether that's like sci-fi or fantasy. It really helps to just kind of have this repertoire of knowledge to have a better understanding of monsters, because then you can pull referential things if you want to make a referential monster, or you can truly make something brand new if you've already seen all the possibilities there are out there, right? Because like again, like no one could be like completely unique in my opinion. Like I think we all borrow ideas subconsciously, whether we realize it or not. But anyway, it might give you a more intelligent, strategic way to create a monster if you are more well versed on the monsters that are currently out there. And this is the end of my monster video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found this video informative. I definitely did in that class. It was like PowerPoint, and the way she went on to explain things, I thought really worked and made sense to me. So, like I said, this was just a repackaging of information I got from the seminar. I want to give credit where credit is due. If you're watching this video and you enjoyed this video, please go check out Puloma's writings. Please check her out. I'll put her website down here, but please go read her book. Please support her because she has given us this resource and I think we should pay it forward. So I have all her information here as well. Thank you so much for watching and supporting me. I really appreciate it. If you want to support me even further, you can like the video. You can comment down below something that you found relevant to this video. You can also share it with a friend or subscribe to my channel. Please. That would really help me out a lot. I'm hoping to get to the point where I have enough subscribers and watch time where I can start earning a little bit of passive income from YouTube. That would really help my family and myself out a lot during these trying times. So if you do that, I just want you to know I am so appreciative of you and your help for this channel. Thank you so much for watching again, and until next time, thanks. Bye.